Hello and welcome to another exciting installment of our Slate demo series. Today we are talking about aggregates and outputs. My name is Nick Porcella. I am our Assistant Director of Slate Trainings, and we're going to dive right in. This is another topic that we've got a lot of ground to cover. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of this concept, and then we'll dive right into our showcase environment, and I'm going to demo out some aggregates and outputs. At the end, I'll have a little cheat sheet that you can screen grab, but of course, you are also welcome to just keep this recording, or both. So let us set some foundation. It's a lot we could talk about here. But at a pretty basic level, this is really riffing off of the concept of a filter and an export within a query. And that's the lens we're going to take today is through queries. So if a filter, we know, is we think of it as the way to restrict what records we're going to be exporting, then an aggregate offers more customization and specificity in how we restrict. You can see some samples here. We'll dive into those in a moment. On the right, exports on the flip side. We think of these that if an export is the way to indicate what information we want to display about the records, then an output offers more customization and specificity in how to display that query's data. I find that this is a little bit abstract, and I don't want to devote more time to it than that because the best way to learn is by doing. So we are going to hop on over into our Slate training environment here. And like any good cooking show, I know that we could have spent an hour or two or more actually really showing and building these out. But I have pre-built some samples, and we're going to walk through quite a few of them. Not all, but quite a few. So in this environment, you could do this at home as well, of starting a quick query and adding in person name and reference ID as your sandbox. I'm going to start today with our aggregates. And in general, before showing some of these items, all of this can be accomplished with our friend here, the subquery button. So when you come into a query, you can always select that. And we find the subquery filter has our aggregates. And this subquery export button has our outputs, and hence our conversation today. Now, when you select either of those, you have a menu of choices here. And in the effort to be economical today in our time, I'm going to be giving you in a cheat sheet definitions for all these things and also recommending the knowledge base is a great resource. But let's take a look at 5 or 6 of the key aggregates and 7 or 8 of the key outputs. I say 5 or 6 for our aggregates because we can really lump the first two together. The idea of existence versus not existence. And simply stated, it is, does the data point exist? Or do we not have that data point? And we can see in a sample here that if I create an aggregate for exists, which might I add is the default, we could adequately name this mobile phone exists and pull in that export for the mobile phone. And this is essentially generating a list for us of people who have a mobile phone number. On the flip side of that, our non-existence, we could use that same concept here of looking for people with a mobile phone number that does not exist. You can see here that number is quite different. In this case, it's looking for those unmatching or null or absence of values. We have the ability to use an aggregate for a comparison. The sky's the limit here because the comparison can be through a lot of different mathematical operators. We can use our standard friends, less than, greater than, equal to. We can also use things like is not equal to, between. You see in this sample here, I have created something that is looking for people who have a TOEFL score greater than or equal to 80. And I had to join up to a test table of my choosing. This was pretty arbitrary for this session. And I picked the TOEFL table. And then I brought in a total score as an export, and I created what's called a literal. It lets you put in any literal text. I just did the number 80 here to indicate our score, and this will now look for people with that TOEFL score greater than or equal to 80. Small number in our test environment. We also have our friend the formula. This will appear in both the aggregates and the outputs. A formula is what allows us to use SQL. And what I find really empowering about these is you can actually get pretty far by selecting the pound symbol, and that will provide you a list of options here that you can then input your export variables in. I have a sample here that will be non-functional in the test environment, but if I were looking to see who visited our website, I could join out to the pings table and export pings URL and add a formula for at pings URL like, and then using our single quotes and our wildcard here, which is the percent sign, I could then just drop in my university's website in order to find that info. I'm not going to activate this one. I know the results are 0. Again, a test environment woe. Two more to round out a admittedly brief tour of aggregates here would be count. Now, we have both count and count distinct available to us. Count is looking at all the values. Count distinct will typically be looking at unique, i.e. distinct, non-null values. But to look at one very simple sample, we can look at a count of who has 3 or more applications. I joined out to that table and specified my operator here as greater than or equal to, and put in a pretty arbitrary number. Counting also possible. And then last but not least for our quick tour of aggregates would be all the mathematical ones. That's a pretty long list. Everything from average down to variance really can be thought of as a mathematical operator. And to pick just one, again, arbitrary sample, let's create something that is averaging and looking at students whose mean or average GPA is at or above 2.0. For that, similar concepts as we've already looked at, I can join out to the schools table, add in GPA as the export, and then specify with an operator, I want that value to be an average of greater than or equal to 2.0. Aggregates are powerful. And again, they're really looking back at this concept of how do we actually further become custom and specific in restricting our data points. Let's now turn our attention to some output options. Pretty lengthy list. Outputting in Slate is also about this idea of an export. What do we want to display or print? Similar concept. It is the little subquery button here, but our choices are in this output section. Note that there is one called aggregate, which should not be confused entirely with aggregates, but it does function similarly, which we'll talk about in a moment. So within this list I have here, I've just brought in name and ref ID for ease of access, but some common ones. Rank is the default here. This allows us to pull one row that we've specified because a lot of data points in Slate are ranked. There's a great knowledge base article on table ranking in Slate that's in the knowledge base. But this would allow me to specify, do I want someone's rank 1 address, their rank 3 email, a rank 1 phone number? Allows us to specify which row or priority of return we're looking for. I'm going to add these on actually one at a time. Coalesce is looking essentially at the first non-null value. You'll note this is one where we actually can add multiple exports. And in my use case here, I'm telling Slate, show me their mobile phone number if we have it. And if we don't have it, show me something else. In this case, email address. And we just specify that it is order dependent. So the one that is on the top will be looked for first. If we have it, it'll show it. And if it doesn't exist, it'll pull the next item. And you can have this list be as long as you want. Even right away, let's take a look at our preview results here. And we can see we've got rank 1 address pulling in. And students who have a phone number, it means it existed. For students who have an email address, it means we didn't have phone number. And so Slate pulled in the next thing on our list. Continuing our tour, concatenate. Definitely one of the most used, but concatenate really can be thought of as combining multiple columns into one. And far and away, the most common example of this is when Slate stores data for city and state in different columns. Well, concatenate would allow us to join out to the addresses table, add city and region or state, as another export, specify we want a comma and a space in between them, and that we only want the top ranked one, and then actually display that information in one column rather than two. Concatenate, combine columns into one column. We have our friend aggregate here as well. It is essentially doing the same thing, but again, note that this term appears twice. We can perform all our mathematical operators here as well. This would allow us to actually get a count that we can display how many applications does that person have. And that can be counted for anything in the system that you can query. So in this case, we see here in progress, students who have one app. The absence of a value here tells us that they do not have any applications. And we might see numbers of 2, 3, or more, depending on our test records or those who can apply to more than one application. Our friend the dictionary here is definitely one that would take a good deal of time to fully walk through, but dictionary allows us to actually create a formatted array. This is typically used for looping, and we have a demo series actually on this. My colleague Jazz Canty-Lane created one for us on this topic a few months back. You can find it on the Carnegie website, the same way that you got to this video. But note that this will display the data in a very, very particular format. You can see here once I activate this, and I think the one record that may have this here, that we're given this information in a very specific format. And there's a lot you can do with that, but that might open up a lot more conversation than we have time for today. But for looping is the main name of the game. All right, rounding our last few here, we've got existence also available within outputs. Simply stated, this allows us to specify a value and then determine if we have that value, print one thing, and if we don't have that value, print another. And this could be anything. At Carnegie, we typically use capital Y and capital N, but you can use anything you want. This tells us that if we see the letter Y, the value exists. And if it shows the letter N, the value does not exist. Very helpful in deliver mailings. This is what can allow you to actually do liquid markup and conditional logic. Split, I think simply stated, is the perhaps opposite of concatenate. This would allow us to take, for example, one column rather, and split it in half or in some other modality. So in this case here, I can actually identify a student's username from their email address. This is one we see institutions use split for a lot. I can indicate that their person email is the export, and Slate, please split that at the @ symbol. That turns the email address into a username, at least in this fictional use case. And then last but not least here, another one we could spend a lot of time on, we also have the ability to create formulas in the outputs, and that is the same concept as we mentioned for aggregates. You have the ability here to actually add in exports, and we have a pretty complex one here. Definitely would not have time to explore this too fully today, but let me open up these in case you want to parse it out yourself, screen grab. But this one would actually be looking to see the number of days from a student's conversion, in this case, converting from prospect to inquiry. Which, again, we might have one person here who we see this for. Let's find out. Here we go, and we can see that this record, there were 72 days between that conversion. I know that's a lot. My last promise was a cheat sheet, which I'll keep on the screen for a few moments. Again, keep this video, but also feel free to grab this. The knowledge base is your friend, and practice is your friend. If this is a new concept, it's like drinking from a fire hose. It would be very, very common for me to run whole half-day sessions up to 3.5 hours, really deeply exploring these topics. And if you're interested in that, we'd love to chat. That said, definitely keep in mind that this is a journey. I would encourage you to practice, go in, build quick queries, try these things out. And if you have not used these tools before, this is one of the main reasons that you should be using configurable joins. With that, I want to thank you for your time and going on this whirlwind journey with me today. My name is Nick Porcella. Looking forward to talking with you soon. Take care.